What Putin is most scared of, specifically, he's scared of any type of public mass uprising. So from his perspective, he can kill individuals. He could kill Alexei Navalny. He could kill many other individuals. He can kill Yevgeny Prigozhin. But what he can't do is he can't quell a popular uprising.
For Putin, a fifth term as president, and if he lives it out and stays in power beyond 2030, he will surpass Stalin and be the longest serving leader since Catherine the Great. How secure do you think Putin is looking at the moment?
Well, so why would he kill Alexei Navalny? Why would he send Vladimir Kara-Murza to 25 years in prison? Why would he round up any random demonstrator or blogger or anybody who even says the tiniest word of criticism and put them in jail for 8 years? Putin is on the ropes. There's no question. He used to rule with incentives. He would tell everybody, things will get better for you if you keep your head out of politics. And for a while in the economy, things were getting better. They're not anymore. Things are getting worse. The economy is not in good shape in Russia, despite all these statements from Russia that sanctions aren't working. People are suffering in Russia. It's not a good situation. People are dying in the war. And the fact that Putin is taking such harsh and extreme measures against anyone who even mutters a tiny bit of opposition tells you that he's scared. He's scared of his own people. And what Putin is most scared of, specifically, he's scared of any type of public mass uprising. So from his perspective, he can kill individuals. He could kill Alexei Navalny. He could kill many other individuals. He can kill Yevgeny Prigozhin. But what he can't do is he can't quell a popular uprising. So if, for say, 1,000 people show up on Red Square, and then let's say they try to kill whoever sort of was leading that thing, and instead of having everyone disperse, 10,000 people go to Red Square, he can't do anything. And if that happens, then maybe 50,000 go to Red Square, and then 1 million go to Red Square, and at that point, he then will lose power. And that's what he's most afraid of, and that's why there's this absolute, complete totalitarian clampdown on opposition. You can't say a word. You can't say it publicly. There's no media that can say anything because he's scared.
You have just returned from the US, where you were discussing something which has been personal to you in a fight for you, the seizure of Russian assets, which you've long called for. We know the US has passed a bill allowing the use of $5 billion of frozen Russian assets for Ukraine. How close now is the US to sending this money?
Well, so the most important thing is, so just to back up for a second, in total, there's 300 billion of Russian central bank reserves that were frozen after the war started. Nobody knew what they were going to do with these reserves, and the intention was to just hold on to them until the war ended, which everybody thought was going to happen very quickly. Of course, it hasn't. We're now more than 2 years into this war, an enormous amount of damage done to Ukraine, much more than the 300 billion that's been frozen, many hundreds of thousands of people, innocent people killed. And so the obvious morally correct thing to do is to take that money and give it to Ukraine for their defense and reconstruction. The original idea was poo-pooed when I first started talking about it. Everyone thought that wasn't going to happen. And of course, now that we're 2 years into it and digging deeper into our own pockets, that's now become a really sort of accepted idea generally among the voters in most countries. Now, in order for it to happen, and as you mentioned, the U.S. passed a law to say that this should be done. It can't happen by the U.S. by themselves. It has to be done in unison, in conjunction with all of the allies. And that means that the UK has to do it, the EU has to do it, Canada, Switzerland, Australia, Japan. We all have to do it together because we're all the countries with reserve currencies. And if one country does it and no other country does it, then it creates risks for the currency of that country. If all countries do it together, then there's really no option but for people to hold reserve currencies. The U.S. will absolutely confiscate this money, and I believe that the U.K. is now warmed up to it as well. If you listen to UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron, he's now speaking openly about confiscating the money as well. The bottleneck at this point is the European Union. Most of the money, 220 billion of the 300 billion, sits in Euroclear in Belgium. This is a place where sort of a
Mm.
custodian account in Belgium. And in order for this money to be confiscated, there needs to be an EU decision. The EU consists of 27 countries that have to agree with each other unanimously to do it. So far, there are voices of dissent within the EU. And so the only thing that they can agree on up until today is that the interest on the money can be confiscated. And they've come up with that decision, which is a good one.
Okay, so to be clear then, the 5 billion stays where it is until the whole 300 billion is agreed.
No, the 5 billion stays where it is until all countries agree to confiscate money in some way, shape, or form. And I think at that point, the money becomes available.
In which case, at perhaps no time soon, that money will be available, that 5 billion for Ukraine.
Well, it's interesting because just today the announcement was that all the EU countries have agreed to confiscate the interest, and I think that's going to
Mm.
happen pretty quickly, and that's another 5 billion. So I think it's sort of it reminds me a lot of the conversations about providing arms to Ukraine. At first, nobody wanted to
Yes,
provide any arms to Ukraine,
yes.
and then eventually, like someone stepped out and said, "We'll do some missiles, some long range missiles." The UK did that, and then all of a sudden the US said, "Okay, we'll do our missiles," and so on and so forth. That's how this thing is going to work, and it will eventually the money will be confiscated because this war is going to go on. It's going to become too expensive for the taxpayer to fund by themselves, and Russia has 300 billion sitting right there that we should be taking. It makes such logical financial sense as well as moral sense.
It's quite interesting because I was thinking about how you'd react to that news that the EU had agreed to seize the profits from those frozen assets. They're worth around 3 billion euros a year, and I know that was never good enough for you. And we've talked about this before because you wanted the 300 billion and to be completely seized. And I thought, yes, it's a bit like the weapons, and you'll be. I'm not sure how are you feeling optimistic? Are you frustrated? Are you thinking, well, we're getting there, but slowly, slowly?
Well, I've seen it all before. I mean, I've spent almost my entire life in the last 15 years working on getting countries to impose what Magnitsky sanctions, named after my murdered lawyer Sergei Magnitsky, which freezes assets and bans visas. And over this time, one country does something. It started with the U.S., and then Canada did something, and then the UK. The UK passed the law, but they didn't implement it, and then it took a while for the EU after that, and then we got Australia. And so it's always time consuming. It never works the way you want it to, but I mean, I'd be highly confident, no matter what anyone says right now, that 300 billion is going to go to Ukraine. It's just a question of time.
And if and when it does, what kind of effect is that going to have on President Putin and the Russian Federation? How damaging could that be for him and the Kremlin?
I think it would be devastating for him. At the end of the day, war is all about resources. Who has the resources to fight, and what kind of weapons can you buy with those resources? And Putin always had the upper hand in that because Russia's a rich country. It's an oil country. They continue to sell their oil in spite of the sanctions, and um, and Ukraine is a poor country. They don't have any significant natural resources, and all the money was coming from the West, and Putin knew that we were all grumbling, and there was problems at the EU, and there's problems in Congress, and so on. If this money gets freed up, uh, it's a game changer, and you can see. And by the way, Putin values money more than human life, and you can see Putin starting to like do nuclear exercises as a way to try to dissuade us from doing this, and probably some people are even dissuaded. This is so important to Putin. He's ready to threaten nuclear war. Now, of course, he's not going to start a nuclear war if we confiscate this money. He's just huffing and puffing, but um, his reaction shows you how serious and how meaningful this is. I would say next to supplying arms, specifically supplying arms to Ukraine, this is the single next most important thing we could do to help them overcome Putin and win the war.